The galaxy's great heart, the eternal flame, was dying. A celestial body once bright enough to illuminate entire sectors now flickered like a fading candle. For eons, it had been the cornerstone of the galaxy's energy, the source of life for hundreds of worlds. But now it had begun to lose its spark. Every system dependent on its light was falling into chaos, energy shortages, power failures, and an unpredictable climate shifting entire ecosystems. And with the eternal flame slowly dying, the very fabric of galactic society was unraveling. On Earth, Captain Allura Reyes stood at the window of the command bridge of the Resilient, her flagship. The stars beyond were dimmer, the cold expanse of space growing more oppressive with each passing day. The once stalwart Council of Worlds had turned into a feeble bureaucracy paralyzed by fear and politics. No one could agree on how to address the growing crisis. Civilizations that had thrived under the light of the eternal flame were now crumbling one by one. Reyes clenched her fist, her sharp eyes scanning the reports streaming across her console. Despite the Council's indecision, she knew what had to be done. The mission had been handed to her and her crew. Whether the galaxy was ready or not, she had been selected for one reason: humanity's reputation for resilience and resourcefulness. "Captain, we've received word from the Council," her first officer, Commander Lucas Dre, interrupted her thoughts. He was a tall man, with a broad frame and a voice that never wavered, even in the face of imminent danger. "Let me guess," Reyes muttered, turning to face him. "They've decided to do nothing until it's too late." Dre gave a brief, wry smile before passing her a datapad. "Not exactly. They've appointed you to lead a special task force. Your mission: to investigate the core of the eternal flame and find a way to reignite it before the galaxy collapses into total anarchy." Reyes stared at the pad, her expression unreadable. This was it, the moment that would define the fate of everything. "And if I fail?" she asked quietly, knowing the answer even before the question left her lips. Dre's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. "You won't fail, Captain. You've never failed." The pressure of the mission weighed on her shoulders. She had led humanity's most successful operations, fought off alien invaders, and brokered peace with factions that no one else dared approach. But this was different. The eternal flame was no mere star. It was a sacred relic, the backbone of the galaxy's very existence. To tamper with it could have catastrophic consequences. Reyes didn't flinch, though. She knew what had to be done. "Prepare the ship. Gather the crew. We leave in 1 hour." Dre nodded and turned to relay the orders, but just before he stepped away, Reyes added, "Oh, and Dre." He paused, looking back at her with a raised brow. "Tell the Council they're going to regret their inaction. It's about time humanity did something, even if they're too scared to act." Dre smiled. "Understood, Captain." As he exited, Reyes looked out again at the stars, a deep sense of resolve settling over her. There was no turning back now. If humanity was going to save the galaxy, they would have to do it alone. And she would lead them into the heart of the fire itself, no matter the cost. The crew of the Resilient gathered in the docking bay, preparing for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever attempted. They weren't just traveling to the center of a dying star. They were traveling to the edge of the galaxy's future. The stakes couldn't be higher. As the ship's engines roared to life and the crew took their positions, Reyes looked at her team one last time. This was their chance to prove humanity's worth, and nothing, not even the Shadow Heralds, the mysterious faction known for their brutal quest to control the galaxy, would stop them. The eternal flame was going to be reignited, and humanity was going to be the one to do it. The Resilient slipped through the fabric of space, its sleek hull cutting through the void with precision. The crew was a mix of seasoned soldiers, brilliant scientists, and daring explorers, each one aware of the monumental task ahead. As Captain Allura Reyes stood at the helm, the weight of their mission felt heavier than ever. The galaxy was unraveling, and humanity's leadership was their last, desperate hope. But even as they headed toward the eternal flame, Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that there were forces beyond their control at play. The journey had only just begun when the first signs of trouble appeared. It started with the subtle glitches, flashes of static in communication channels, navigation systems that flickered, and alarms that blared for no reason. At first, Reyes dismissed it as the usual technical hiccups, but soon the problems escalated. Data streams were being rerouted, and unauthorized access points opened in the ship's systems. Someone was tampering with their operations. What the hell is going on? Reyes muttered to herself as she reviewed the latest reports. She had been briefed on the possibility of sabotage, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "Captain," Commander Dre's voice crackled through her comms. "We've got a serious problem. I've been looking into the ship's logs, and it seems someone's been altering our trajectory and communication logs." Reyes felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean, altering?" "It's not just a glitch, Captain. Someone's tampering with the ship's data to send us off course. And the worst part? They've been in control of the command center for over an hour." Her heart sank. "Isolate the intruder signal. Lock down the affected systems." "Already on it, but it's worse than that. We've been sending out distress signals on frequencies we didn't authorize. If the Shadow Heralds are tracking us, we might be walking straight into a trap." Reyes ran a hand through her hair, struggling to keep her focus. This mission was supposed to be humanity's one shot at saving the galaxy, and now they were being sabotaged from within. Who could it be, and why now? The answer came too quickly. A sharp, breathless voice broke into the comms. "Captain, it's me. Dre's compromised." It was Lieutenant Nadia Kor, the ship's head of security. "We found a hidden transmitter in his quarters. He's been working with the Heralds." "Aye." Before she could finish, the ship shook violently, throwing Reyes against the wall. The entire crew was jolted from their stations as alarms blared across the ship. A moment later, an explosion rocked the aft section of the ship. "Bridge to engineering." Reyes barked, her voice steely with command. "Report." "We've lost power to the engines," came the frantic reply from Chief Engineer Riley. "We're drifting. We'll be sitting ducks if the Heralds have detected us." Reyes gritted her teeth. There was no time to waste. Prepare a boarding party. Secure the intruder. We're not letting this mission fall apart. As she headed toward the ship's control center, Reyes steeled herself for the confrontation ahead. Her mind raced. Dre, her trusted first officer, had been working with the enemy. A man she had relied on, trusted implicitly, had betrayed them all. But why? What had the Shadow Heralds promised him? By the time she reached the control room, the situation had escalated further. Dre was cornered, a small group of loyal crew members pinning him to the floor, his expression wild, like a cornered animal. His eyes darted to Reyes as she entered, a mixture of guilt and defiance in his gaze. "You don't understand, Captain," he spat, struggling against the restraints. "The Heralds have offered me the galaxy, an end to the chaos, a new order. You can't stop them. No one can." Reyes stared down at him, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "You were supposed to be loyal, Dre. You were supposed to be with us. The galaxy isn't worth saving if it's just going to burn itself out anyway," he snarled. "We need something new, and I'm not going to let you ruin that." "Take him to the brig," Reyes ordered coldly, "and lock down the ship. No one else gets off this vessel until I'm sure we're not being compromised again." As Dre was dragged away, Reyes stood in the center of the room, the weight of betrayal sinking in. This mission was more dangerous than she had imagined. And with the Shadow Heralds targeting them from within, she wasn't sure who else might be working against her. But one thing was certain, no matter the cost, she would see this mission through. The galaxy's survival depended on it. The Resilient drifted toward the coordinates where the Eternal Flame's core was located. The journey had become far more perilous than anticipated. With a mole in their midst, sabotaging their every move, trust was in short supply. Reyes was more determined than ever to succeed, but the weight of betrayal gnawed at her. Even with Dre locked away in the brig, she couldn't shake the fear that there were other shadows lurking within her crew. "We've arrived at the labyrinth," Commander Nadia Kaur reported, her voice clipped and professional, but Reyes could hear the tension underlying it. "There's no sign of any enemy ships in the vicinity. For now, we're clear." The Labyrinth of Light was a colossal structure, an ancient temple built around the eternal flame itself. Long abandoned and forgotten by most of the galaxy, it was said to house the secrets of the Flamekeeper's power, the only known artifact capable of reigniting the dying star. It wasn't just a relic, but a labyrinthine puzzle, with its walls made of energy fields that shifted like living things. The structure itself was alive, its paths ever-changing, designed to test any who sought to harness the flame's power. Reyes, with her crew at her side, stepped off the ship and into the entryway of the labyrinth. The air felt different here, heavy with centuries of untold secrets, ancient energies. The path ahead shimmered, flickering like a mirage, and the faint hum of energy reverberated in the walls. The labyrinth's entrances were never simple, and this one was no exception. A massive stone door, its surface covered in alien runes, stood before them, seemingly impervious to the touch. Lieutenant Ilya Volkov, the ship's cryptographer, stepped forward, scanning the symbols. "I've seen these markings before. They're not just writing, they are coordinates, star maps. This door is linked to the flame's core, and we need those coordinates to reach it," Reyes asked, already knowing the answer. "Exactly," Volkov replied. "The door will only open when it receives the correct sequence, but we need to be careful. Any misstep might activate the labyrinth's defenses." Reyes nodded, turning to the rest of her team. "Let's move fast, but carefully. The sooner we unlock the flame's core, the sooner we can reignite the star." As they worked together to decipher the code, Reyes couldn't help but feel the weight of their task growing heavier. Every move here felt like a gamble. The labyrinth wasn't just a physical maze, it was a psychological one, designed to test the resolve of those who dared to challenge it. They were being watched, not only by the ancient systems within the temple, but by something or someone else. The Shadow Heralds were lurking, waiting for them to slip up. Volkov completed the sequence, and the massive door slowly rumbled open, revealing a sprawling interior filled with shifting walls of light. The path before them twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, the walls occasionally flickering out of existence and reappearing in new configurations. The very air seemed to pulse, making it difficult to focus. "This is just the first test," Reyes muttered, her eyes scanning the labyrinth. "Stay alert. No matter how disorienting this is, we keep moving forward." As the crew ventured deeper into the maze, the challenges began to escalate. Energy fields materialized before them, trapping them in rooms that shifted with every step. They were forced to solve intricate puzzles, each more dangerous than the last, as walls of light closed in behind them, threatening to trap them forever. Each wrong turn, each failure, sparked the activation of deadly traps, sudden bursts of energy that seared through metal, walls that collapsed, and floors that dropped away into bottomless darkness. "This is it," Dr. Kalia Zhang, the ship's chief scientist, said in a strained voice as she manipulated a console on the wall to deactivate a field. "This labyrinth was meant to keep the unworthy away. We can't afford to make any more mistakes." Reyes could feel her pulse quicken with every passing minute. They were getting closer, but the pressure was mounting. Suddenly, as they navigated through a narrow passage, a new challenge presented itself. The path before them split into 3 directions, each one glowing with a different hue. The team paused, knowing the decision was critical. "Which way?" Volkov asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Reyes scanned the paths. There was no clear answer, but the glowing hues reminded her of the flame's colors, the hues of energy, light, and life. Trusting her instincts, she pointed toward the path illuminated in the deepest red. This way. As they proceeded, the air grew denser, the walls vibrating with power. They were close, closer than ever to reaching the eternal flame. But as the path ahead began to open up, Reyes felt an unsettling presence wash over her. The feeling wasn't just physical, it was a deep, instinctive recognition. Someone, or something, was watching them, and they were not alone. A voice, dark and whispered, reverberated through the walls, sending chills down Reyes' spine. "You think you can reignite the flame? You're already too late." The voice was familiar, a reminder that the Shadow Heralds were never far behind. And now, the true test was about to begin. The voice echoed through the labyrinth, its presence pressing down on Reyes and her crew like a physical weight. It wasn't just the shadows around them that felt suffocating. It was the knowledge that the Shadow Heralds had known their every move, every step they had taken. The enemy was already here, closing in on them. Reyes paused, her senses sharpening. "Stay close and stay quiet," she whispered to her crew. "We can't let them know we've heard them." The walls hummed, vibrating with energy, as if the labyrinth itself was alive and responding to the threat. They pressed on, each step measured, careful. The flickering paths twisted in unpredictable ways, and the walls continued to shimmer, their luminescence casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach out, as if beckoning them toward danger. "Captain," Lieutenant Corr said in a low voice, "I've got movement. Multiple signatures up ahead. They're cloaked." Reyes' heart skipped a beat. The Heralds. Their notorious ability to infiltrate without detection was their greatest weapon. Yet Reyes refused to be intimidated. They were here for the flame, and no matter what it took, she would ensure they didn't get it. "Prepare for a fight," she ordered, her voice hardening. "We won't let them stop us. Not now." They approached the next bend, the path narrowing further. The tension in the air was thick, the strange hum of the labyrinth only amplifying their unease. Then, without warning, a flash of blue light sparked across the walls, blinding them for a brief moment. The moment the light faded, Reyes instinctively drew her weapon, her team following suit. They weren't alone anymore. Figures emerged from the shadows, cloaked in black, their faces hidden behind sleek helmets, their movements eerily fluid. Shadow Heralds. Their presence was unmistakable, their technology far beyond anything humanity had developed. But it wasn't just the heralds that made Reyes' heart race. It was the one leading them, someone she knew well. A tall figure stepped forward, his helmet gleaming in the dim light. "Captain Reyes," his voice rasped, sending a cold shiver down her spine. "I must admit, I expected you to have more sense than this." "Caden," Reyes muttered under her breath. The name was like a poison to her, every syllable a bitter reminder of the past. Caden Corr, her own brother. He had once been a promising officer in the Earth Defense Force until he'd been seduced by the Herald's ideals. Now he was their leader, and the dark path he had chosen had led him here, to her, leading an army to stop her from completing the mission. The Heralds fanned out, taking strategic positions to trap them. "You failed, Alara. The flame is ours," Caden continued, his voice colder than the void of space itself. "The galaxy is ours, and your futile attempt to save it is just the last gasp of a dying system." "You're wrong," Reyes shot back, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "Humanity isn't dying. We're rebuilding, and we won't bow to you or anyone else who thinks they can control the galaxy." Her brother's eyes gleamed behind his helmet. "You still don't understand, do you? We're offering the galaxy freedom. Freedom from the chaos of endless war, from corrupt leaders and weak governments. We will reignite the flame, but under our rule." The crew of the Resilient tensed, weapons raised. The air crackled with the tension of an imminent clash. Reyes knew this would be no easy fight. The Shadow Heralds were masters of both deception and combat. But the real battle lay ahead, not just against her brother's forces, but against the very ideology he had come to represent. If the Heralds succeeded in controlling the eternal flame, they would reshape the galaxy in their image, a galaxy bound by tyranny and fear. Caden stepped closer, his voice low, almost regretful. "You always did have a heart, Alara. It's a pity it's now your greatest weakness." Before she could respond, the walls of the labyrinth shimmered, shifting as if the very structure was choosing sides. A blast of intense energy shot out, cutting through the air with a sound like tearing metal. Reyes instinctively dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blast. The room exploded into chaos as the heralds launched their attack. Caden's voice rang out, his command as chilling as the blast. "Take them down. The flame will be ours." Rhea's heart pounded. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Her brother, the heralds, the labyrinth, and the eternal flame itself, it was all coming together. But they would not back down, not while humanity still had hope. "Hold your ground," Reyes shouted, rallying her crew as the battle raged around them. "We fight for the future of the galaxy." The walls shifted again, opening a new path. The team had no choice but to move forward. The eternal flame was within reach, but so was the greatest challenge they had ever faced. The enemy was closing in, and the final confrontation was inevitable. It would be a battle not just for the flame, but for the soul of the galaxy itself. The battle in the heart of the labyrinth was chaos incarnate. Blasts of energy ricocheted off the walls, illuminating the shifting paths with each strike. Reyes crouched behind a column of light, her pulse thundering in her ears. Her team was scattered, fighting with everything they had, but the Shadow Heralds were relentless. They moved like shadows, blending with the environment, only to strike in precise, deadly bursts. Caden's voice echoed across the battlefield, taunting her. "You cannot win this, Alara. You've already lost." Reyes gritted her teeth. Her brother, once a man she had trusted, now stood on the other side of this fight, leading an army of fanatical zealots. There was no room for compromise now. The only way forward was through them. "Stay focused," she yelled to her crew. "We need to keep moving. The flame's core is just ahead. We can't let them stop us." Lieutenant Core, ever the tactician, shouted back from behind cover, "I've got eyes on Caden. He's near the core's chamber. If we don't make it past his forces, the flame is lost." Reyes knew the stakes. If the heralds reached the core before them, it would be the end of any hope of reigniting the star. The galaxy's fate would be sealed under the herald's iron grip. "Volkov, John, with me?" Reyes commanded, running toward a narrow corridor that seemed to open just in time. "Core, hold the line here. Don't let them flank us." The corridor wound downward, a long stretch of light twisting around them like a serpent. The closer they got to the core, the more oppressive the energy felt, like a constant hum beneath their skin. Every step was charged with the power of the flame, but it was a power that had been twisted by the herald's influence. They were too close. Suddenly, the walls shifted again, and a flood of shadow heralds appeared at the far end of the passage. Their weapons raised, they charged, but Reyes was already moving. She fired first, her shots precise, taking down 2 of them before they could react. But they kept coming. For every one she dropped, 2 more emerged from the shadows. "We need a plan," Dr. Zhang shouted, her voice tight with fear as she aimed her rifle. "We don't have time for a plan." Reyes snapped, her eyes fixed on the flickering, glowing doors ahead. The core was within reach. Volkov, ever the strategist, threw a grenade, the explosion echoing through the labyrinth, creating a brief opening in the herald's line. "We push through now, or we don't make it." Reyes didn't hesitate. She bolted forward, her crew behind her, moving in perfect synchrony as they cut their way through the heralds. The battle was a blur of blinding light, weapons fire, and shouts. The narrow corridor made it impossible to avoid the enemy completely. But with each step, they drew closer to the goal. Reyes could feel the heat from the core, an almost physical presence now, pushing her onward. At last, they reached the door, massive, ancient, and pulsating with power. As Reyes stepped toward it, the walls hummed louder, the energy intensifying. She could almost feel the flame itself, waiting to be awakened. But as she touched the door's surface, a crackling energy barrier surged to life, stopping her in her tracks. Caden. Reyes growled, knowing that he had orchestrated this trap. Her brother's voice again reverberated through the chamber, cold and mocking. "You think you can just walk in and take what's ours?" His voice was distant but unmistakable. "I will not allow you to destroy everything we've worked for." With a wave of his hand, the energy barrier solidified further, sealing the door completely. Reyes slammed her fist against the barrier, frustration and rage mixing within her. "There has to be a way through," she muttered, her mind racing. "We'll need to disable the core's defenses," Volkov said, his tone calm but urgent as he began scanning the surrounding area. "The barrier is tied to the labyrinth's central system. If I can hack into its network, we can bring it down." Reyes nodded. "Make it fast." As Volkov worked, the heralds closed in once more, and Reyes' team fell into a defensive formation. The walls seemed to pulse with energy as the shadows grew longer, the heralds' voices rising in unison. The walls themselves were reacting, shifting, distorting as if the entire labyrinth was alive and fighting back. "We don't have much time," Volko said, his voice strained as he typed rapidly on his portable console. The pressure was suffocating. Each second that ticked by felt like a lifetime. Reyes could see the heralds advancing, their weapons gleaming, ready to make their move. Suddenly, the hum of the energy field faltered, and the barrier flickered. Reyes wasted no time. "Now!" she shouted, leaping forward just as the barrier collapsed, her crew right behind her. The doors to the flame's core slid open with a final, resounding clang, revealing the heart of the labyrinth. The eternal flame, a massive sphere of glowing, molten energy, sat at the center of the chamber, suspended by ancient machinery. But the heralds were already there, Caden standing before the flame, his hand outstretched, as if he could claim it for himself. "You're too late," Caden sneered, turning to face Reyes with a grim smile. "The flame is mine now." Reyes raised her weapon, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "Not today, Caden, not while I'm still breathing." The tension in the chamber was palpable. The eternal flame, a swirling mass of energy at the heart of the labyrinth, cast an eerie, pulsating light that reflected off the metallic walls, adding to the surreal atmosphere. Every breath Reyes took seemed heavier than the last. The flame was within reach, but so was her brother. His figure stood between them and the galaxy's last hope, a cold smile playing across his face. Caden raised a hand, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You still don't understand, do you, Alara? You're not just fighting me, you're fighting the future. The flame is the only way to bring order to the galaxy, to stop the chaos that's tearing everything apart." Rey shook her head, her weapon aimed squarely at him. "The only thing you're bringing is tyranny. You've lost yourself, Caden. You're not the man I knew." Her voice cracked with the weight of the words. She had tried to understand, tried to reach him, but this was no longer her brother. The Shadow Heralds had positioned themselves around the chamber, their weapons drawn and ready. Rey's team was poised for action, but they couldn't afford a full-out assault just yet. Not without a plan. "I did what I had to do," Caden continued, his gaze cold and distant. "The galaxy needs a ruler who can make the hard choices. I've seen the future, Alara. The flame will bring peace, even if it means breaking a few fragile systems along the way. Humanity will survive, but it needs to be led by me." "Your peace is built on oppression," Reyes replied, her voice unwavering. "Humanity deserves more than to be ruled by fear." For a moment, Caden's eyes softened, a flicker of something almost like regret flashing in their depths. but it was gone in an instant. The leader of the heralds raised his hand, and his soldiers moved into position, blocking the path to the flame. Enough talk. You've already made your choice, and I've made mine. The energy in the room shifted, the air thick with anticipation. Reyes knew this was it, the final confrontation. She could feel the weight of her brother's presence like a physical force, but it wasn't just him she had to fight. It was the vision he represented, the dangerous allure of a galaxy united under one iron fist. "We'll stop you, Caden," Reyes declared, stepping forward. "I don't care what it costs." In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos. Caden's heralds moved with deadly precision, firing their weapons. Reyes ducked behind a column of light, returning fire as her team engaged. The sound of blaster fire and the hum of energy shields filled the chamber, but Reyes' mind was focused solely on one thing: getting to her brother. Her hands were steady as she fought her way through the soldiers, each shot calculated, each movement precise. Volkov was at her side, covering her as they advanced. Lieutenant Kor was already coordinating with the rest of the crew, moving into strategic positions to keep the heralds off their backs. But even with all her training, Reyes couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. They were outnumbered, and the heralds knew this battlefield better than they did. Every corner was a trap, every shadow hid an enemy. And then, just as she thought she could make it past the final line of defense, Caden stepped forward. The room seemed to darken around him, the flame's light bending in unnatural ways. He held his weapon in one hand, but it wasn't pointed at her. It was pointed at the flame itself. "No," Rey shouted, her heart skipping a beat. "Caden, don't." But it was too late. With a single deliberate motion, Caden triggered a device attached to his arm. The flame began to flicker, its energy destabilizing. Reyes felt the shift in the air, the deep thrum of the flame beginning to wane. "You fool," she screamed, her mind racing. If the flame was destabilized now, they wouldn't just lose the power it could provide. They would lose the key to the galaxy's survival. The Herald's ideology, their control, would consume everything. Caden turned toward her, a dark glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "You always did have such faith in people, Alara. That's why you'll never understand. This is the only way." Reyes could feel the time ticking down, the fate of the galaxy slipping away. With a desperate surge of energy, she charged, her team behind her. This would be her last chance to stop him. She slammed into him, knocking him off balance, but he was quick to recover. The two of them grappled for control, their bodies colliding with the force of their conflicting ideologies. "You'll never stop me, Alara," Caden roared, pushing her back. "The galaxy will bend to my will." Reyes, breathless and bruised, met his gaze. "The galaxy doesn't need your control," she growled. "It needs hope, and I will fight for it until my last breath." With one final, desperate push, she lunged at the device in his hand. The blast that followed would determine the galaxy's future. The explosion from the device rocked the entire chamber. A shockwave of intense energy surged outward, knocking both Reyes and Caden to the floor. The room trembled, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze, time itself holding its breath. Reyes struggled to her feet, her ears ringing, her vision blurred. Her body ached from the impact, but there was no time for pain. The flame was flickering wildly, its once stable energy now unstable and chaotic. The entire labyrinth seemed to be coming apart, as though it couldn't contain the power coursing through it. Caden was already standing, his face twisted in anger and desperation. He had lost control of the device, but his eyes burned with a cold resolve. He reached for his weapon, aiming directly at Reyes, but his hand was trembling. You think you've won, Alara?" He spat, his voice strained. "You don't even understand what you're stopping. This is the only way for humanity to survive. You've always been blinded by your ideals." Reyes wiped blood from her lip, her own voice steady despite the chaos around them. "No, Caden. You've been blinded by power, and that's what will destroy us all. She could feel the pressure of the collapsing energy, the instability of the flame threatening to implode, taking everything with it. There was no time for further debate, no room for any more words. Action was all that mattered now. Reyes didn't wait for him to make his next move. She lunged forward, using every ounce of strength she had left to tackle him again. Her hand shot out, slamming against the device that had caused the initial explosion, trying to disable it once and for all. But Caden was fast, and their bodies collided with a force that reverberated through the chamber. His grip tightened around her wrist, pulling her away from the device. "You'll never stop me, Alara. You'll never understand." "Then make me understand," Reyes growled, using his moment of distraction to twist his arm and send him stumbling backward. The sudden movement caused the unstable energy around them to ripple again, the flame flickering violently, now on the brink of collapse. Reyes knew that if it wasn't stabilized soon, it would burn out entirely, leaving nothing behind but a dying galaxy. Desperation filled her as she glanced around the room. She couldn't fight her brother and fix the flame at the same time. But there was no choice. If she didn't act, everything they had fought for would be lost. "Volkov, Jung," she shouted, hoping her team was still in fighting shape. "Get to the core now. I'll hold him off." Volkov's voice crackled over the comms. "We're on our way, but we're not going to make it in time. The flame's energy is unstable. If we don't get it under control in the next few minutes, the whole labyrinth will explode." The urgency in his voice drove Reyes forward. She had no idea how much time they had, but it wasn't much. Caden, meanwhile, had recovered, and he was advancing toward her once again. His face was a mask of fury, but there was something else behind his eyes now, something dark, as though he had accepted this outcome. The battle was no longer just about control, it was about something deeper. He wasn't just fighting for power, he was fighting to prove that he had been right all along. "You don't get it, Alara," he said, his voice low, almost mournful. "I've seen the future. The flame will save humanity, but only if we control it. If you destroy it now, everything we've done, everything we've fought for, will be in vain. There's no other way." Reyes shook her head, her chest tightening with a mix of anger and sorrow. "It's not about control, Caden. It's about freedom. You can't sacrifice everything for a future that only works for you." He stepped closer, his hand tightening around his weapon once more. "Then you'll die for that freedom, just like all the others." Before he could pull the trigger, Reyes acted. She ducked under his arm, using his momentary distraction to land a quick blow to his side. His weapon fell to the ground with a heavy clatter. But he didn't back down. Caden's expression twisted into a snarl, and he charged at her, his strength amplified by his resolve. This time, Reyes wasn't ready for the sheer force of his attack. He shoved her back, and she collided with the wall, pain shooting through her body. Dazed, she tried to focus, but Caden was already upon her, closing in with a look of cold determination. His hand reached for the device again, trying to reactivate it. Reyes knew she had one last chance. Her fingers brushed the edge of her weapon, and with a swift motion, she pulled it from her belt, firing a shot that struck Caden's hand. The device fell to the floor with a resounding clink, the energy it had been harnessing quickly dissipating. Caden staggered back, his hand now bleeding, but the fury in his eyes only deepened. He still wouldn't give up. The entire chamber seemed to tremble as the unstable energy of the flame surged again. "We're out of time," Rey said, her voice tight with desperation. "If we don't stabilize it now, it will destroy everything." She knew she couldn't do this alone. There was only one thing left to do, to convince her brother, to make him see the truth before it was too late. "Caden," she said, her voice softer now, filled with a final, fragile hope. "Please, help me fix this. The galaxy needs you, but not like this." Caden stood motionless for a long moment, his hand hovering over the disabled device, his breathing ragged. The energy from the flame was still unstable, but now it was more than just raw power. It was a ticking time bomb. His eyes flickered between the device, the flame, and his sister. The anger, the belief in his cause, was still there, but something else had shifted within him. Doubt. Ray's voice, quiet yet persistent, reached him. Caden, this isn't the way. You're not the monster they've made you out to be. You're better than this. The words seemed to pierce through the layers of justification he'd wrapped himself in. He wanted to deny it, to reject everything she said, but deep down, the familiar voice of his sister, the one who had always believed in him, stirred something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't too late. You're wrong, he muttered, more to himself than to her, his hand trembling as he reached for the device again. The galaxy is broken. It needs control. It needs order. Ray stepped forward cautiously, the urgency in her eyes never leaving. Order at the cost of everything we fought for? It's not control we need, Caden. It's trust. We can rebuild together. We have to believe in that. The flame wavered in the background, the brilliance flickering erratically. Its pulse seemed to sync with the chaos in the room. The labyrinth's very foundation groaned under the weight of their actions, the fragile structure now in danger of collapsing entirely. Caden's hand hovered over the device, his jaw clenched, the conflict inside him warring with the weight of his choices. His eyes flickered to Ray's once more. She wasn't just his sister. She was the only person who had ever truly understood him, the one who still believed that humanity could be something better than what he was trying to force it to be. For a moment, time stretched as he wrestled with his own convictions. Could he really destroy everything for the sake of an ideal that might not be achievable? The future he had envisioned seemed certain, but it had never factored in the people, the ones who would fight, bleed, and die for something greater than just survival. Suddenly, with a sound like a distant thunderclap, the labyrinth quaked violently. The chamber they stood in seemed to shift, the walls bending under the strain of the energy. Caden snapped his gaze to the flame, seeing the threads of power spinning out of control. It was too late to fight it. The flame was dying. The energy would soon collapse in on itself, and with it, the last hope for the galaxy's future. In that instant, everything became clear. He couldn't control it. He couldn't fix it on his own. The very thing he had fought for was slipping through his fingers. The galaxy wasn't just on the edge of destruction. It was about to fall, and no amount of power could save it. His heart clenched with the realization. Alara, Ray stepped forward, her hand outstretched. We don't have time to argue, Caden. We need to stop this now. Without waiting for him to respond, she reached for the device, her fingers brushing against his. A flash of understanding passed between them. Words weren't enough anymore. They were the last chance, together, to make this right. With a synchronized movement, they began to work in tandem, their focus entirely on the flame. Ray's mind raced, her thoughts clearer now than ever. They had to reset the flame's core energy, redirecting its unstable currents before it detonated. The intricate web of power it had woven was more delicate than she had imagined, requiring precision and skill beyond what even she had prepared for. Caden's hands shook as he assisted her, a mix of reluctance and realization in his actions. Together, they rerouted the power, channeling it through a makeshift conduit Ray's quickly devised from the remains of their equipment. The flame's light flickered, then steadied as the dangerous surge of energy began to calm. The labyrinth's tremors slowed, and the walls stopped groaning under the strain. Ray's and Caden shared a brief, breathless look, but neither spoke. They couldn't afford words right now, only action. The flame stabilized, its pulsating energy returning to its original, controlled state. It was dimmer, but still there, still alive, humanity's last hope for a future. And then, all at once, the tension seemed to drain from the room. The crackling hum of the flame subsided, and the labyrinth's shaking came to a halt. The chamber was silent except for their labored breathing. Ray's looked at her brother, the man who had once been her hero, and now the man who had almost destroyed everything. He stood there, breathing heavily, his gaze fixed on the flame, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over, is it?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. "The galaxy won't just heal because we fix this." "No," Reyes answered, her voice steady but filled with a weariness that matched her own. "But it will survive. Together, we can build something better." Caden stood in silence for a long moment, his hands trembling. Finally, he nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't know if I can be the man I was, but maybe I can help you rebuild." Ray stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's a start." As the flame's energy began to stabilize once more, the galaxy was given a second chance. But this time, it was not about control or power. It was about hope, rebuilding, and the enduring strength of humanity. The last Flamekeeper had not just saved the galaxy. She had rekindled the very heart of its future.